When I make videos in this Let's Get You Into series, I try to find moderately sized discogs that might be either particularly inaccessible music-wise or contain enough variety that you might not know where to start. Some of these careers can be long, as with Jeff Rosenstock and Ween, but I tend to keep my picks relatively modern and relatively focused discography-wise. For this video, I decided it was really time to break the mold I've set for myself and dive into an artist who has been consistently releasing material for over 5 decades, and an artist who has one of the least focused, most all-over-the-place musical journeys in the entire music industry. That artist, of course, is Jimmy Buffett. You likely know Jimmy best for his starring role in Jurassic World, where he heroically saves the margaritas. But what you might not know is that since 1970, he's been fostering one of the most fascinating and invigorating musical careers in recent history. Today, we're going to be discussing all 35 of his albums and giving you what should hopefully be an easy way into the career of one of this generation's greats. Yes, I am a pirate. Starting with Jimmy's 1974 album, A1A is nothing short of a masterpiece and probably the greatest tropical rock album ever written. Sure, the first half may have some moments that verge on embarrassing, but when that second half starts and we get to songs like A Pirate Looks at 40 and Migration, it's impossible to deny the beauty and power that a man as simple as Jimmy Buffett can create just by doing his best to replicate the vibes of his favorite place, the beach. Jumping forward 2 whole decades, the second essential album from Buffett is a bit of a tonal shift, but not a very large one. Fruitcakes sees Jimmy a lot further into his career as a much more mature and intelligent musician. He toys with different styles and energies here, such as the spooky vampires, mummies, and the Holy Ghost, and especially the title track, which contains social commentary that rivals the likes of Rage Against the Machine and Public Enemy. At 60 minutes, it's the perfect length to get completely lost in, and when you come out the other side, I think you, like I, will be a changed person. Jumping all the way back to 1974 again, this time you might be shocked to hear that just 10 months prior to A1A, Jimmy had a far different sound. See, this was his jazz rock era, and I think that while it never reached the heights of the album later this year, there's something to be said for the slick clarity of the recording and the fusion of jazz and pop that never grows tiresome however much I hear it. There's nothing quite like a good folk pop track, and jumping back another year to 1973, we've got one of the best folk pop albums ever in A White Sport Coat and a Pink Crustacean. It's emotional, heartfelt, funny, and most of all, it's simply beautiful. A graceful ode to the nature of life, and a testament to the power of simplicity in music. Out in the West Texas town of El Paso. Jumping ahead once again into the 90s, Barometer Soup shows Jimmy in a new era with a new, sharper voice and some truly fantastic storytelling lyrics. His take on cowboy country is revolutionary, and I can't believe it took him so long into his career to realize it was the perfect match for his particular brand of humor and wit. In the late 70s, music was going through something of a ska revival, and believe it or not, at the forefront of this revolutionary wave was none other than Jimmy Buffett. Volcano is a record that I think even non-fans of ska will appreciate, with snappy hooks, politically charged lyricism, and some of the best trombone playing in the genre. It would be Jimmy's most danceable album, if not 4. While danceability has never been a particularly weak suit for Buffett, on Havana Daydreamin', we see him letting fully loose and playing some of the most out there and ahead of its time dance punk ever recorded. Quirky, relatable, and endlessly groovy, there's not a dull moment as you fall deeper and deeper into the grooves of Jimmy's genius mind. For a man so seemingly joyous at all times, you might be shocked to see his foray into emo rock placing so positively in this list, but trust me when I say that for Jimmy, the style fits like a glove. Sharp, painful, and self-loathing lyrics work only to aid the desolate musical spaces that these songs inhabit, with twinkly clean guitars contrasting sharply with the aggressive, distorted climaxes that make this one of the more emotionally poignant records in the man's career thus far. Taking the sharp, distorted guitars I talked about on Take the Weather With You and cranking them up to 11, License to Chill is a strong contender for the most impressive post-hardcore record of its decade, containing some of the most throat-shredding screams ever laid to tape and a whirlwind of sound for instrumentals that give the feeling of being sucked deeper and deeper into a bout of psychosis. Buffett's first foray into cloud rap goes over far better than one would expect on One Particular Harbor, bringing to mind the likes of Viper and Echo 2K a whole 3 decades before their great records would drop. Ghostly production and emotional auto-tuned vocals help Jimmy stand out from the crowd on this release, and the way this project all comes together is really something to behold. Living off borrowed time, the clock ticks faster. Jimmy's first hip-hop project came many years prior, though, in High Cumberland Jubilee. To this day, it's a marvel that the man could craft such intricate instrumentals from what sounds like largely film and song samples, and then have the artistic vision to weave such vivid lyrical storytelling and wordplay over top of it. This is a timeless, abstract hip-hop classic. And the last of what I consider to be his essential albums, Changes in Latitudes/Attitudes, is perhaps his most famous work, and it's not all that hard to see why when you really look at it. Some said that he was caving to the more modern wave of 80s throwback synth pop, but I think he breathed some fresh air into a scene that was otherwise stagnant at the time. Now for the albums that I think might not be for everyone, but are still worth checking out. Coconut Telegraph is one of the stranger records in Jimmy's discography, marking his departure into ambient and electronic music with a distinctly frigid leaning. It's not hard to see why this one was never particularly hailed as a classic, but I think it's a creative jump that more or less works for him. Jimmy's first record, Down to Earth, is definitely a weird start for him, far from his peak of both relevance and skill. Instead, he started out with a very strange take on spiritual and avant-garde jazz, which is groovy, intense, and liquid in its structure. It's not the only time our guy would make his name known in jazz circles, but for a debut, it's quite the interesting specimen. Preceding the hyperpop wave by several decades, Son of a Sailor sees Buffett at his most inventive, even if I don't think it always works for him. The deconstruction of club music and tendencies towards more industrial and ambient sounds make this one of his more out-there classics, and while I don't find myself returning to it all that often, it's a respectable effort if nothing else. Being that this is a soundtrack and not a full album, I didn't feel comfortable putting this into the essentials section, but I think it's no less important that Jimmy Buffett fans give this one a good shot because it's truly a spectacular sight to see the man dive so confidently into the sounds of Shibuya Kai and Pico Pop, and the results are some of the most joyous and thrilling music ever recorded. I've not mentioned any of Buffett's metal works as of yet, and while we will get to that, it's mostly because I don't find them to be all that good. The exception to that, however, is this record, Beach House on the Moon, revolutionizing and arguably creating the rap metal and nu metal styles we all know and love today. Jimmy's freaky vocals and the down-tuned groovy bass lines make this actually one of the more tolerable forays into heavy music he ever did. You might be surprised to hear this, but The other metal album in Buffett's discography that I hold a lot of respect for is actually a Christmas album. Not only that, but it's his one and only power metal record in his career. Considering this comes so late into his life, just 7 years ago, it's incredible to hear his voice reaching such towering heights, and for a Christmas album, no less. One of the more down-to-earth rock records Jimmy ever did, Last Mango in Paris still has a ton of tricks up its sleeve. With every track flowing seamlessly into one another, there's a far more psychedelic feel to his interpretation of garage rock than you would expect given his straight-edge demeanor. I'm even told that if you loop it from back to front, it makes a perfect circle sonically, which is very cool if true.
Ruckus! Bring the motherfucking ruckus! Ghostface, catch the blast of a hype burst. My clock burst, leaving a hearse.
Now we're into some truly weird stuff. Not all of it's good, not all of it suits Jimmy, but it's at least interesting enough that diehard fans will find something to enjoy. Starting with Somewhere Over China, I think that there may have been good intentions behind the record's hardcore boom-bap styling, but Jimmy puts on way too many different voices here, and while some of his flows do make for an enjoyable listen, I think it sits at a weird midpoint of not being that good by both the standards of hip-hop and by the standards of Jimmy Buffett's discography.
Now you be the stranger and...
No more coherent is his full-on dive into post-rock and experimental music on Riddles in the Sand. The big killer here is the runtime, with this thing dragging on and on with long track after long track after long track. Some of the climaxes reached are somewhat fascinating, and for fans of more out-there music, I'm sure that this will be a very interesting indulgence, but at the end of the day, I don't think many fans of his better works will be revisiting this very often. Even more experimental, I would struggle to even call Far Side of the World music at all. He seems to have gone off the deep end here and just fed static into his microphone at various pitches for literally the entire runtime. There's not a single traditional song on here, no lyrics about cheeseburgers and margaritas, just screeching from front to back. There's something utterly fascinating about the trajectory that led him to this point, and I think it's a curiosity worth observing from afar, but I highly doubt many will be listening to this all the way through. A funny pun on his name in the title tells you just about all you need to know about the direction Jimmy would take on Buffet Hotel. Comedy has been one of Jimmy's strong suits since day one, but never has it taken the forefront so much as on this record. The issue is that by 2009, his wit had grown dull, and while it can be endearing to hear him make jokes that likely would have elicited chuckles in his prime, there's very little that will draw a major reaction now, even 14 years on from its release. Far less of a hit for a Christmas album than the last one we talked about, Christmas Island sees Jimmy take a swing for a more subdued, lush instrumentation with more traditional choral vocals backing his soft, sweet voice, and I just don't find it that compelling. Sure, I'll always be willing to give Jimmy's Christmas records a shot after how fascinating Sea Sun is, but this just doesn't do it for me. Now for the albums that I would outright avoid if I were you. There's not that many, but they're worth mentioning and warning you about. First is Off to See the Lizard, which sees Jimmy driving headfirst into oncoming traffic, with the sound of the inevitable collision making up the instrumentals, and his howling of pain making up the vocals. Seriously, his attempt at industrial music is pathetic and outright unlistenable at times. Skip this one. Unlistenable for polar opposite reasons, the sugary sweet demeanor of Floridays is even more sickening than the horror that was Off to See the Lizard. I can't stand hearing him like this, and it genuinely makes me question his motives to create something so optimistic and uplifting out of seemingly nowhere. Repulsive stuff. For as good of a combination as it may sound on paper, the 90s showed us that Jimmy Buffett and black metal do not mix. Even by black metal standards, the production is terrible, and imagining him sitting there at 50 years old trying to chase the trend of the genre for a quick buck is really unsettling. Not much redeeming this one in my opinion. And if you thought his black metal era was rough, just wait until you hear his absolutely despicable butchering of brutal death metal just 2 years later on Don't Stop the Carnival. There's nothing fun or interesting about listening to this record. The riffs are sloppy, the vocals are unintelligible, and from a songwriting perspective, I struggle to find a single track that the audience would be able to get down to in a crowd. Pitiful.
Get a dose of dirty code to go, been cold since cold flow. Got a wire to enlarge and I set up.
Unlike some of his decent to great hip-hop records, 2020's Life on the Flip Side is about as gross as the genre can get, fully falling subject to the woke Marxist mob and completely bowing to the moralists he spoke such truth to in the past. It's hard to believe that someone who wrote such a revolutionary political track as Fruitcakes would fall so far from grace, but alas, here we are.
Can't just label me racist cause I'm related to people who did some terrible shit.
Even worse, though, is the way that he made such a fool of himself on 1988's Hot Water. YouTube reactors are still laughing to this day at how pitiful and whiny his attempts at social commentary are on this record, and for good reason. He comes off as a whiny, petulant child demanding to be given respect despite being nothing more than a screaming infant yelling about how hard it is to be white. As we near the end of the Jimmy Buffett discography, it can be hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and Callaloo seems to intentionally block out what little light we might have envisioned up to this point with its electronic gibberish and synthetic nonsense. I can't think of a single reason to listen to this, no matter how curious you might be. And finally, saving the worst for the last, is Songs from Saint Somewhere. I can't even bring myself to describe how unlistenably bad this album is. From front to back, I don't think there's even a discernible note on the record, and unlike the endearingly bizarre noise on Far Side of the World, it literally just seems like he didn't learn anything from that and instead released the same album but washed it out in reverb as well. A sad, sad end to an extensive and eclectic discography. Thanks for sitting through this nightmarish April Fool's joke of a video. I've got a ton of real projects in the works right now, and I hope that you'll all stick around for those. This was a super fun creative writing exercise, and I'm looking forward to whatever dumb idea I come up with next year. But for now, I just want to thank my patrons for helping me to do this for what will very soon be 2 whole years, which is crazy. Life is super busy right now as I'm gearing up to move in the summer, but if you guys bear with me, I'm hoping to have a ton more free time to work on these videos once I'm moved. So look forward to both that and the half dozen videos I'm hoping to get out before then.